Right, so repurchase agreements, generally not a sales transaction, but they put it in with sales transactions because companies have tried to record them as sales transactions in the past with very poor results. Okay, so the basic question when you're looking at any transaction is, what is the economic substance here? And so a company enters into a contract to transfer an asset to a customer. And you could think, oh, sell it to a customer. But they're going to repurchase it at a later date. And so you have to ask yourself, is it actually a sale? And probably not, because the company has agreed to buy it back, usually at more than its selling price. These are really a financing arrangement. And they have to be recorded as such. That was not always the case in the past. Okay, so let's take a look at this. First of all, there's a lot, in the text gets into a lot of language on unconditional forward obligations, call options, put options. I'm not even going to go there, okay? You don't need to be, we're not going to go into that right now. But anyway, the repurchase agreements, they've been around for a long time, and the main purpose would be to provide short-term loans that use the asset as collateral. So because, so the economic substance, it's more like a short-term loan, but the accounting for these in the past, until fairly recently, under some conditions, they could be classified as a sales transaction, and that is no longer the case. So what happens, say company A transfers investments, well actually they don't even use a company name here. So this is the way that these are supposed to be recorded. A company sells equipment to a customer for $100,000, they agree to repurchase it in a month, is that right? 117, no, in a year for the $121,000. So what has to be recorded is, yes, the company gets the cash of $100,000, and then they've got a liability, okay? At the end of the first year, they book the interest expense, and they add that to the liability to the customer. Interest expense at the end of the next year, liability to the customer, and then they will be pay off the essentially the loan at the end of the period. Okay, so these are usually what the companies that really got in trouble with the repurchase agreements were companies you might have heard of, like Lehman Brothers. And a lot of times the asset that they're transferring temporarily to another company is investments in stocks or bonds in exchange for cash. And these are repo agreements, and they'll usually state that company A will buy back the securities from company B at a price greater than the original transfer price. And so Lehman Brothers used these for many years, and they had accounted for them as secured borrowing, which is what this is. But then it came up to about 2001, and they wanted to improve their balance sheet. And they weren't doing it by operations at that point, so they wanted to show less debt. And so they started to account for these repurchase agreements as sales transactions. And the quote that I have is that Lehman used this brief but very specific guidance to create agreements that would fall outside of FASB's bright line guidance for substantially all, and therefore could be accounted for as sales. So they took one little thing in the accounting, in FASB, and they said, oh yeah, we can kind of squeak this in here and call these sales. Companies often will get a legal opinion to make sure that that's okay, and no lawyers in this country would do it, so they had to go to England, and they finally got a London firm to say that these transactions were just fine, but only in England. So they were basically using questionable accounting to get off-balance sheet financing. They got the debt off their books because if you account for it as a sales transaction, you do not have these liabilities on your books. So now we come to 2007. Lehman had all these assets, mortgages, receivables, lots of subprime mortgages. We all know what happened. Housing market collapses. And so they started to enter into more repo agreements at the end of each quarter to try to keep the debt from piling up on their balance sheet. They didn't want to lose their ratings. And so at the end of each quarter, they'd do all these repo agreements that were treated as sales transactions, and then they'd put them right back on, and the debt would go back up again. So they'd buy the assets back, the debt ratio would go up to where it was before, and there was about between 39 and 50 billion involved in these. They declared bankruptcy in 2008. So repo transactions did not cause the bankruptcy, but they helped to hide what was really going on. Okay, so as far as repo repurchase agreements, you need to know generally the proper accounting for that, and what I just gave you was kind of the reason for it.